There's a common myth, both ancient and modern, that when someone goes quiet, it means there's nothing happening underneath, but silence is rarely empty. Silence is often charged with meaning. You see this in mythology, stories like Sleeping Beauty or Persephone or even the Lady of Shalott. The woman is quiet, distant, seemingly passive, but the silence in those stories isn't absence. It's anticipation, it's waiting, and we've forgotten how to read that kind of silence in real life. Today, we've built a culture that treats communication like a transaction. If it's not loud, direct, or digital, it must not be real. But human beings don't always speak the most important truths with their mouths. We express them in glances, in distance, in a shift of tone, or a subtle withdrawal. A woman might stop texting you first. A friend might stop bringing up something that used to matter. Your sister might say, "I'm fine," but the way she says it breaks your heart if you're listening. If you're not listening, you'll miss it, and that's the problem. We're living in a time where people are more emotionally isolated than ever before, yet paradoxically more visible and available than ever. That disconnect leads us to ignore the signals that require more than logic to understand. It requires attunement, presence, a willingness to actually care about what isn't being said. I've worked with many young men who come into my office confused, telling me about a relationship that ended suddenly or a friendship that fell apart. They say things like, "She never said anything," or "I didn't know she felt that way," but the truth is, she did. She showed it, maybe not in a way that looked like an argument or an emotional explosion, but in subtle emotional withdrawal, in disappointment, in a turning away. She was waiting for a signal, for him to reach out. And he didn't, because he never learned how to read silence as a cry for connection. We've trained people, especially men, to value certainty and clarity, but human emotion doesn't function on those terms. It functions in the gray, in the ambiguity, in the space where meaning has to be felt, not just understood. That's why relationships falter, not because people stop caring, but because they stop noticing. And here's the painful truth: many people aren't ignoring you out of cruelty. They're protecting themselves from the ache of reaching out one more time and being met with indifference, so they go silent. Not because they're gone, but because they're waiting for you to notice. She's waiting for you to step beyond comfort and into awareness, to hear the message beneath the silence, to respond, not with cold logic, but with courageous attention. Masculinity today is in crisis, not because men are inherently broken or toxic, but because the responsibilities that once gave men purpose have been eroded, mocked, or misunderstood. In a culture that increasingly tells young men to suppress their instincts, to distrust their own voice, to question every impulse unless it has been softened, sanitized, or made politically acceptable, something fundamental is being lost. The masculine spirit, at its best, is not domineering, it's not cruel, and it's certainly not passive. It is protective, initiating, grounded in order and meaning. But when that spirit is confused or discouraged, men retreat. They fall into apathy. They grow numb. I've spoken to many young men who no longer know what's expected of them in a relationship. Should I reach out? Should I just wait? What if I'm seen as needy or controlling? And so, instead of acting with courage, they sit in silence, overthinking every possibility until opportunity dies. And they think they're being respectful or mature, but they're not. They're being absent. And absence is not virtue. We've mistaken emotional withdrawal for strength. We've sold men the lie that keeping your feelings inside, staying detached, and waiting for someone else to make the first move is a sign of composure. But that's not composure. That's fear disguised as virtue. That's ego pretending to be wisdom. And it's a lie that's leaving relationships starved of leadership, of vulnerability, of truth. There is a weight in every man's chest, a knowledge, even if faint, that he was built to carry something heavy, not just physical burdens, but emotional ones too. He was built to lean into discomfort, not run from it. But today, we reward passivity, we medicate pain, we scroll instead of speak, and in doing so, we train men to opt out of the very responsibilities that would give them meaning. If you look closely at history, at story, at scripture, even biology, you'll find that the man is the one who moves toward the unknown. He steps into chaos not to control it, but to transform it. And yet today, many men step back, unsure of whether they're even allowed to speak, to lead, to pursue. And when a woman sits there, silently hoping for him to say something real, to acknowledge her pain, to show initiative, not with force, but with honesty, he remains quiet, because he's been told that silence is safe, that not saying the wrong thing is better than risking saying anything at all. But the truth is, when you don't take emotional responsibility, someone else pays for it, often the woman, often the child. Often the friendship. A man who refuses to reach out isn't neutral. He is absently complicit in the erosion of trust, connection, and love, and deep down he knows it. He feels it in the guilt he can't name, in the tiredness that isn't solved by sleep, in the quiet moments where he wonders why he feels like something's missing, even though he's done nothing wrong. But maybe that's the point, he's done nothing. And maybe that's the problem. Reaching out, truly reaching out, requires courage. Not the kind of courage that wins applause or makes headlines, but the quiet, trembling kind that sits inside your chest when you're about to say something vulnerable. We've been conditioned to believe that initiation is only necessary for grand gestures, proposals, declarations, major life decisions, but in truth, initiation is something we're called to every single day. In the text you hesitate to send, in the apology you've rehearsed in your mind but haven't delivered, in the question you're afraid to ask because you don't want to hear the answer, there is profound strength in making the first move, not out of desperation, but out of intention. Because it means you are willing to step into emotional risk. You're willing to say, I care enough to be uncomfortable. I care enough to be misunderstood. That's not weakness. That's the essence of strength. The idea that the strong are detached and aloof is a cultural illusion. The strongest people are the ones who are willing to feel deeply, to love openly, and to stand exposed in the truth of their own longing. In the story of the hero's journey, and this has been told in every culture, in every age, the hero never waits for a guarantee. He acts, he moves forward, he enters the cave knowing it might contain a monster, but hoping it holds treasure. That cave for you might be a conversation you've avoided, a woman you've let drift away, a family member who's built a wall so high it feels impossible to scale. But reaching out means you're willing to walk toward that wall, even if you don't know how to climb it yet. What's tragic is that we often mistake distance for rejection. She pulls back a little, and you tell yourself, well, she must not care anymore, so you match her silence with more silence, thinking it's mutual, when in reality, it's just mutual fear. Two people, both waiting for the other to be brave, and neither willing to be the first one to speak. That's how relationships end, not in shouting matches or betrayals, but in these slow, silent withdrawals where no one was willing to be the initiator. But it's not just about saving relationships, it's about becoming the kind of man who can, the kind of man who takes emotional responsibility, not just for his own heart, but for the space between himself and the people he loves. That space is sacred, it's where intimacy lives, and it survives only when someone is willing to tend to it. When you reach out, you become that person. You become the one who says, this connection matters more than my pride, more than my comfort, more than my fear of how I'll look. That's initiation. That's action rooted in meaning, and that kind of action doesn't just heal the other person, it transforms you. Time has a way of making cowards out of all of us when we hesitate. It doesn't scream at us or force our hand, it just moves forward relentlessly, like water carving out a canyon, slowly but with irreversible force. And while we wait, telling ourselves we'll reach out tomorrow, next week, when the moment is right, life quietly rearranges itself. People change, hearts close, what was once possible begins to vanish, not because of one dramatic event, but because of inaction spread out over 1,000 small, avoidable moments. Regret is the shadow of the life you could have lived. And it's heavier than failure. When you fail, you at least know you tried. But when you stay silent, when you don't pick up the phone, when you walk away instead of leaning in, when you assume it's too late before you even begin, you rob yourself of the growth that only comes through action. That's the cruelty of avoidance. It feels safe in the moment, but over time it poisons you, slowly, quietly, and eventually you can't distinguish it from your own voice. I've spoken to older men, fathers, brothers, friends, who still carry the ache of people they didn't speak to when they had the chance, a daughter they misunderstood, a partner they shut out, a friend they let drift away. And when you ask them what they'd do differently, they rarely mention big decisions. They mention moments. I should have called her that night. I should have told her the truth. I should have held her hand when she was hurting. Small things, simple things, things that would have required so little effort, but weren't done, and now they live in the mind like ghosts that refuse to leave. We think time will always give us another opportunity, that the door will stay open until we're ready to walk through it. But life doesn't wait, and neither do people. She won't wait forever. She might wait for a while, hoping, giving space, assuming you'll come around. But eventually she'll protect herself. She'll begin to detach, to build a new story in which you're no longer a part of the resolution. And when she finally closes that door, it won't be with rage, it'll be with resignation. Quiet, clean, irreversible. That's the kind of ending that hurts the most, not the explosive ones, but the ones that vanish while you were waiting for certainty. So you have to ask yourself, what are you willing to lose in the name of not looking foolish? What does your pride actually protect you from? Because when time runs out, when the moment passes, all that will remain is the ache of what might have been, and the knowledge that it was you who chose silence. And in the end, that's the weight of inaction. It doesn't just cost you a connection, it costs you a piece of your own integrity, because deep down you knew and you did nothing. There's a deep moral weight in love, one we don't talk about often because we've reduced love to emotion, convenience, or compatibility. But real love, authentic, meaningful love isn't just a feeling. It's a responsibility. It's a choice made over and over again in the presence of fear, of ego, of pride. And if you have the capacity to love, then you also carry the burden of expressing it truthfully and courageously. You're not entitled to hold that love inside like it's a secret. You owe it to the world and to the person waiting to speak it. When you know someone is hurting, hoping, waiting, even if they won't say it outright, and you still choose to remain silent, that's not neutral. That's an abandonment of duty. You're turning your back on the opportunity to heal something, to restore what's been broken, to remind someone they're seen and they matter. And when you withhold that truth, not because you don't feel it, but because you're afraid, it becomes a form of quiet betrayal, not the kind that's loud or malicious, but the kind that scars people in ways they never fully recover from. We have an obligation as human beings, especially as men who seek to live with purpose, to speak truth into the chaos, to confront what is difficult, to make ourselves known even when it would be easier to stay silent. And yes, it's hard. Yes, it might backfire, but the risk of rejection is a small price to pay compared to the weight of silence that lets another person suffer alone. When you reach out, you're not just performing an act of kindness. You're fulfilling a moral duty because you know better, because you see what's going on beneath the surface. And once you see, you can't pretend not to. That's the unbearable burden of awareness. It demands action. And when you ignore that call, you not only let someone else down, you let yourself down, you betray your own capacity for good. Some men wait their whole lives for permission to speak their heart. They wait for the perfect sign, for complete certainty, for a risk-free moment. But that moment never comes. The call to act never arrives with a guarantee. It arrives as a quiet nudge, a gut feeling, a painful awareness that something needs to be said, and said now, and if you ignore it long enough, that call stops coming. You become numb, detached, and eventually you convince yourself that love isn't worth it, that reaching out is pointless, not because it's true, but because you grew tired of carrying the responsibility that love demands. But the truth is, she's still waiting, not for grand gestures, not for poetic perfection, just for you, to show up honestly, to speak plainly, to say, I see you, I care, and I won't let fear decide for me anymore. That's what love looks like in its highest form. Not safety, but sacrifice, not certainty, but truth, and that truth might be the one thing that keeps someone from walking away for good. So speak it, before it's too late. So here we are. at the edge of something quiet but sacred. A moment that most people miss, a moment where action, though small, could change everything. Maybe you're thinking of someone right now, someone who's gone silent, someone who used to laugh a little louder around you, or look you in the eye a little longer. Someone who never said goodbye but stopped saying hello, and maybe you've convinced yourself it's too late, that silence means closure, but deep down you know it's not too late, not yet. She's waiting for you to reach out. Not because she's weak, but because she still believes in something you've forgotten, that relationships are worth fighting for, that words still carry power, and that healing often begins with a simple, honest voice saying, "I'm here." You don't need a perfect script. You don't need certainty. You need only to care more about truth than pride, more about connection than comfort. The world is full of people starving for someone to go first, to initiate, to lead, to love. Be that person. Let this be the moment where you stop waiting for the right time and decide to make this the time. Pick up the phone, send the message, knock on the door, speak the words, before silence becomes permanent, before waiting turns into walking away, before regret sets in as the story you never changed. This is your moment. She's waiting. Now it's your move.